Congestion control is a complex problem. In this video, I will motivate this particular problem. The actual details we will see in another video. A quick recap. These are the services that TCP provides. I will let you glance at it. And these services are provided in the context of the sliding window protocol. So this picture should help recollect what sliding window protocol is. Nonetheless, let me ask a question to ensure indeed you remember. So if W is the window size in packets and MSS is the maximum segment size, that is the segment size that we are using, the throughput is given by the window size into the segment size divided by the round trip time. By the way, this is an approximation because there is transmit time to also consider. So if W is large, you can ignore the transmit time. So what is the problem of congestion control? Suppose you have a TCP connection between a process that is running on this host, let me call it host A, over many routers. At the other endpoint is this process that is running on this host B. So the question is, what is the throughput that can be achieved by this particular TCP flow? Now this is a function of many factors. These routers are also serving other flows. And it is not that all these other flows are also taking the same path. Some flows may end in like this, some flows may go like this, so on and so forth. Not only that, at any given router, the number of flows that pass through it is going to vary with time because flows end, new flows start, so on and so forth. Now these flows could be TCP or UDP. The difference is important because UDP doesn't do any congestion control. It just blasts away the data. Whereas TCP tries to ensure some amount of fairness. These issues will become clear later. Also, the link bandwidths that interconnect the routers could be different. For example, this could be a 100 Mbps link. This could be a 10 Mbps link. This could be a 100 kbps link, so on and so forth. So the end result of all this is the throughput that a flow achieves is governed by all these factors and it is going to vary over time. Now we are doing a sliding window protocol where the throughput that you are going to achieve is a function of this window size. Now, if you want to use the sliding window protocol, you need to select this W such that you get a fair share of the throughput. Let me illustrate this point through this example. Suppose your TCP flow is going over these routers R1, R2, R3, so on, and I'm also indicating this link bandwidth by this number R1, R2, R3, Rn. Now this router, let's say, is supporting K1 flows, supporting K2 flows, and so on and so forth. And let's also assume that these flows are TCP flows. Now what is your share of the throughput at this particular router when this link bandwidth is R1? So if fairness is honored, the throughput that you will get is basically R1 over K1 because this link throughput bandwidth is going to be shared across all these flows. At this, it is going to be R2 over K2. At this, it will be R3 over K3, so on and so forth. Throughput is a single number. You're not going to get these distinct numbers. So what you end up getting is basically the minimum of all these. We will look a little bit more into this issue a bit later. So this is what you're going to get. In fact, you may get more than this because for these other flows that are going through it, their bottlenecks will be different from your own bottleneck. In other words, those other flows may not be making use of the full share of their bandwidth at a given router. Now, how does one estimate W so that you get this particular number? Now, if your estimate is small, you're going to underutilize. In other words, you're not making use of all the available bandwidth. On the contrary, if you estimate large, thereby trying to get the best possible throughput, you're going to congest the network because you're pumping more data than the network can handle. And as if these problems are not enough, this W itself will have to vary over time because some connections will end, some new connections will start along the path. As you can see, determining W is not at all an easy task. This underutilization is not desirable, but more importantly, overestimating W is dangerous. It's very easy to push a network into congestion, and it is not so easy to get it out of congestion. You can relate to this because you must have experienced traffic jam. It's very easy to cause a traffic jam, but getting out of the traffic jam takes time. So that is where the term congestion control arises. You basically want to prevent these sources from sending too much data too fast and thereby congesting the network. Since we are making use of the sliding window protocol to send data, let's spend a little bit of time understanding what this protocol does. So this is a quick summary. So in sliding window protocol, we use the network as a pipe and you determine the capacity of this pipe, which is basically the bandwidth delay product. And then you're going to fill up this pipe with this data. This is what we call steady state or equilibrium. Once the pipe is filled up, as you remove one packet from the pipe, you're going to add another into the pipe. Now tell me, who gives you the information that the packet actually has been removed from the pipe so that you can add another? ACKs, right? So ACKs help clock out data. So this is called self-clocking. So sliding window protocols possess this very interesting concept called self-clocking. So let's see this in a bit more detail. So let's look at sliding window at the link layer first. In other words, you are employing sliding window only between two nodes A and B, and this link that is interconnecting them has a bandwidth B. This is the link rate, and the round trip time between these two is RTT. Now W is the window size that you are employing, and I'm specifying this in bits. So my first question to you is, what is W? Rather, what would you like W to be? We saw this before. You want W to be the bandwidth delay product to achieve maximum throughput. Now tell me, if you're using this W, what is the maximum throughput that can be achieved between A and B? Well, this will be the link capacity that is equal to B, because if you see here, this is one round trip time, and within this round trip time, you are sending W bits. And the throughput that you are achieving is W over RTT. This, if you set it equal to this, will be equal to the link capacity. Now tell me, what is the rate at which ACKs are coming? Now this is equal to the rate at which you are sending the packets, because you are generating one ACK for every packet that you are getting. And at what rate are these packets getting sent? This is dictated by the link capacity. So as you can see, the spacing between these ACKs is being dictated by the transmission time of the packets that are being sent. Now, if you look at the sliding window protocol, even if you were to set W less than this bandwidth into round trip time, the rate at which you are going to get the acknowledgements is being dictated by the link capacity. So as you can see here I'm not utilizing the full link capacity. This time is idle. When I'm getting the ACKs and thereby sending new packets during this time, the throughput that the sender is achieving is equal to the link capacity. If you see, I didn't do any estimation of what this link capacity is because my W is in fact less than this, but still when I'm sending the data, when I'm getting the acknowledgements, I am achieving the link capacity. So these ACKs have this nice property called self-clocking, where depending on ACKs, if you send out data, you are in fact achieving the throughput that is entitled to you. This W matters in the sense that during this time, you don't want to stay idle. You still want to send packets. So this self-clocking, where the rate of arrival of ACKs convey information about the link capacity, is a very useful feature. What we have seen so far is over one hop. What if the sliding window protocol is being run over many hops as shown in this figure? So in this example, suppose these were the link bandwidths. What would you set your window size equal to? And what is the maximum throughput that you can achieve in this particular scenario? So if you did the calculations, you will realize that the maximum throughput that you will achieve will be dictated by this link, which is the bottleneck link, because this has the lowest bandwidth along this path. And you would want your window size to be set equal to the round trip time into this bottleneck bandwidth of 100 kbps. Because if you were to set to a value that is greater than this, packets will start to queue up at this particular router and get dropped, because you cannot achieve more than this throughput anyway. Now my question to you is whether self-clocking still works in this context. So what is the rate at which ACKs arrive at the sender? What is it a function of? If you do the calculation, you will see that this is dictated by the rate at which packets are being sent on this bottleneck link. So this picture captures that you are sending a big window of packets, and these are the packets. This is the high bandwidth link, and this is the low bandwidth link, and again this is another high bandwidth link. So the packets are being indicated in this fashion because the transmit time on this link is low, whereas here, because it's a low bandwidth link, the transmit time is large. Once these packets cross the bottleneck link and come to this high bandwidth router, so for example in this particular case, the spacing between them is going to be dictated by the transmission time on this link. Whereas here you are going to transmit them fast. So this transmission, if you look at it, may finish right here, and this transmission is going to finish here. So at the next host, which is here, these packets are going to come here. And this spacing between them is the same as this spacing, which is in turn dictated by the bottleneck bandwidth. So that is what is shown in here. So now again here, these are going to occupy less transmit time, but the spacing between them is being dictated by this particular spacing. Now for every received packet, if you are sending an acknowledgements, these acknowledgements also are going to preserve the spacing, and that is the spacing at which the sender receives the acknowledgement. So if you see, without doing anything really sophisticated, just by sending packets back to back here in this window, we have figured out what is the bottleneck bandwidth along the path. These ACKs are going to carry that information. By the way, this is an idealization. In this, we have not assumed that there is competing traffic, so on and so forth. So when competing traffic is there, this preservation of space may not happen. But if the network is not congested, on average, these spacings do indicate what the bottleneck bandwidth is. In other words, this is not a perfect estimate, but you do get some information about the bottleneck bandwidth as part of this ACK clocking. And if this bottleneck bandwidth changes, for example, it now moves from here to here, you will still be able to detect it because the ACK spacings will change. In other words, when the bottleneck bandwidth, if the bandwidth increases, the ACKs will be spaced closer. And if the bottleneck bandwidth decreases, the ACKs are going to be spaced much apart. So this is something you can leverage on. Now here is a bit of a paradox. Suppose I were to set my window size to be greater than the bandwidth delay product. This can happen because you are estimating W, and at times your estimate may exceed the bandwidth delay product. So what is the sliding window protocol saying? The throughput, as we saw before, that you can achieve through the sliding window protocol is this, that is W over round trip time. And this, if you substitute here, is going to exceed the bottleneck bandwidth. But what is the self clock saying? It is saying that you can only send out packets in response to this acknowledgements, and they are capturing the transmission time of the bottleneck bandwidth. So the maximum throughput that you can achieve is bottleneck bandwidth. So what's happening? This is saying you can get throughput greater than bottleneck bandwidth, which is not possible, by the way. Self-clocking is rightly saying that you can achieve the bottleneck bandwidth. So what do you think is happening? The hint is in the round trip time. So when you set your window size to be greater than the bandwidth delay product, basically you are pumping in more data than the network can handle. So you are overflowing the pipe. In which case, where is this additional packets going to get stored? They will be storing in the buffer of some of these routers. Now if packets are getting buffered, naturally the round trip time they are going to experience will now include the queuing delay as well. So this bandwidth delay product was calculated with a round trip time when there was no load. Now, when you exceed this capacity, you are basically going to increase the round trip time. So these acts that you are getting, this spacing no doubt is capturing the bottleneck bandwidth, but this round trip time that you are seeing is now going to include the queuing delay. In other words, when you are calculating this is RTT load. So this is captured in this figure as well. As long as your window size is less than this bandwidth delay product, your throughput is going to be dictated by the window size, because in this case you are keeping the link idle for some time. The maximum throughput you can achieve is at this rate. Beyond this, if you increase your window size, your throughput is going to level off. You can't achieve more than the bottleneck bandwidth. But if you increase the window size further, now your delays are going to progressively increase. Not only that, the queue is also going to build up. So when you do congestion control, you basically want to work in this range. So how do we tackle the problem? Same idea as before. We still view the network as a pipe, but now we are going to estimate this bandwidth delay product. How do we estimate? That in fact is the crux of congestion control. We will look into it in detail later. So as part of this estimate, we use a variable called the congestion window that tracks this bandwidth delay product. And just like the sliding window protocol does, we are going to make use of the self-clocking to determine what the bottleneck bandwidth is and use the acts to clock out data. Well, this is exactly what sliding window protocol does. What is new? The new thing is, after having gone through the problem motivation and all the subtleties involved in the sliding window protocol, you can now appreciate better what I'm going to tell as part of congestion control in the later video. So in the solution approach, we are going to follow these 3 steps. First, we will see how to get to this equilibrium, that is filling up the pipe. Then we will look at conservation at equilibrium, that is we don't want to put new packets until old ones are removed. And then we will look how to adapt to the path dynamics, that is varying bandwidth delay product. So to summarize, congestion control is a very complex problem. We need to implement it in the context of the sliding window protocol. And we have seen that self-clocking is a very useful feature which we are going to use to capture the bottleneck bandwidth. We also need to determine and adapt this window size such that not only don't you underutilize the bandwidth, but also that you don't congest the network. The actual details are up ahead in other videos.